Good evening, Madam President. Madam President, I move for acceptance of the Joint Committee's favorable report and passage of the bill.
And the question is on passage. Will you remark?
Yes, Madam President. Thank you. Madam President, the clerk is in possession of an amendment, LCO number 5647. I ask that the clerk please call the amendment and I be granted leave of the chamber to summarize.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 5647, Senate Schedule A.
Senator Flexer.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the amendment before us is a strike-all amendment, and it does become the bill. Madam President, the bill before us builds on the work that we've been leading as a state senate for the last several years, improving our state's already very strong laws concerning domestic violence and protecting victims of domestic violence, sexual harassment, and adding some additional oversight for online dating operators to protect people from the fraud and abuse that can occur on those platforms, and also sets up a working group to look at issues around child grooming. Madam President, we're here this evening debating this legislation, as I mentioned, because the State Senate has been really focused on these issues, and I'm proud that this clearly, by the number of the bill, is a priority bill for the State Senate, and I'm grateful to Senator Looney and Senator Duff for their leadership, not only on this bill, but on previous similar bills that we've worked on in the past, Madam President. Madam President, this bill also comes to us from the Judiciary Committee, where it enjoyed bipartisan support, and I know we're going to have a conversation here this evening, but we've had great leadership in the Judiciary Committee from Senator Winfield and Senator Kissel, who has always been actively engaged in these issues and thorough in his consideration of these issues, and generous in his leadership. And I'm grateful for the conversation we're going to have here this evening, and hopefully consensus on the measure before us. Madam President, as I mentioned, this bill deals with a number of different issues, but perhaps some of the important things do need to be highlighted. First of all, as you know, and as I've watched you lead around our state discussing, Madam President, over the course of the last 2 years, it has been incredibly difficult to be someone who lives in a family, who is in a relationship where there is violence present. At a time when people saw their homes as a safe haven in a pandemic, far too many people found themselves dealing with an even more dangerous situation right there in their own homes. And there were so many people who had the circumstances of that challenging situation heightened greatly by the pandemic. And what we're looking at here this evening, I think, is a strong response to what's happened here in our state, Madam President. Madam President, our domestic violence programs all across the state of Connecticut really stepped up to ensure that while we were all dealing with this incredibly difficult experience, that they were there for people who were struggling, who needed a safe place to be, both safe from the pandemic and safe from violence. And this bill before us recognizes their work and recognizes that we need to do better, that we need to do more. I'm grateful that this legislature is about to invest more resources for the first time in more than a decade in these programs and the people who work day in and day out helping victims become survivors. Madam President, the bill before us also will set up a system where there will be child advocates all across our state. Madam President, as you know, while anyone who has to deal with domestic violence in their household is experiencing a challenge that none of us would want to face, it's especially challenging for children who are witnesses and victims themselves to this violence. Madam President, the bill before us with the advocates that will be dedicated just to fighting on behalf of the children in these situations, I think is going to be a huge step forward for protecting these children and ensuring that our systems that respond to these families dealing with these crisis situations, that the resolutions can be more focused on these children so that we can prevent that cycle of violence from perpetuating, and we can deal with the immediate trauma that so many of these children have experienced. And I'm really pleased that we're leading in this way tonight and standing up for children in this way, Madam President. Madam President, it's important that we're looking broadly at these issues and, again, taking a substantial step forward for Connecticut to continue to be a national leader in its response to domestic violence and making sure we're at the cutting edge of policy initiatives that give people the tools they need. When the domestic violence programs throughout the state do their work and try to engage with people to help them remove themselves from these violent relationships and home situations, you know, the number one thing they often hear reported back is that that victims didn't know where to go for help. And so what we're debating here tonight will hopefully go a long way to improving that. And I like to think that the conversation that we have here in the state Senate also goes a long way in terms of recognizing that it's never a victim's fault when they're in a situation of domestic violence. They didn't ask for it. The children certainly didn't ask for it. But for far too many victims and survivors, it does feel like it's their fault. And so whatever we can do to improve our systems and make sure that those dedicated frontline workers who work day in and day out in our domestic violence agencies can have the tools they need to help support these women and men, mostly women, but sometimes men, is really, really vital, Madam President. Madam President, again, this bill deals with a few other really important issues, as I already mentioned, but I did particularly want to highlight the issue of domestic violence, again, especially in light of the 2 years that we've had in this state and what a challenging time it's been. And I think across the board, this bill recognizes very critical issues, understands that this should be a state where people get to exist free of domestic violence, that they get to work in places that are free from workplace discrimination and sexual harassment, and that people, when they're engaged in activities on the internet, that they have a real assessment of what dangers are out there, whether or not a background check is done, and whether or not it's a platform where fraud is rampant. And so, Madam President, I'm really pleased to stand here this evening and begin a conversation about this important piece of legislation, and I'm hopeful, Madam President, that this bill will find strong support here this evening. Thank you, Madam President.